Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's stories begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And a little note before we begin. You may notice a few brief ads in the first 10 minutes, but after that, the rest of the video is completely ad-free. Just you, the silence, and the stories. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the night carry you. If you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. I used to see things when I was a kid that I could never explain, and for a long time I thought I was the only person who had ever seen anything like them. I did not even have a name for them back then. I just knew they looked human, but they were not right. They were shaped like people, with heads, shoulders, bodies, and the general outline of arms and legs, but there were no clear details, no faces, no clothing, no skin, nothing that made them look like normal people. They were almost completely blacked out, like shadows that had been pulled away from the wall and made to stand on their own. The only way I can describe the surface of them is static. Not bright static, not like a glowing TV screen, but that broken, shifting look old televisions used to have when the channel was wrong. Their bodies were dark, but there was movement inside the darkness, like tiny flickers or noise crawling across them. They did not look solid in the same way a person looks solid, but they also did not look transparent. They were there. I could see them as clearly as I could see furniture, doors, walls, and my own family. That was what made it so terrifying. They were not half-glimpsed shapes from the corner of my eye. They were visible. They were present. And somehow, nobody else ever seemed to see them. Later in life, I found out that other people had seen things they called shadow people. And when I first heard that term, something in me went cold. It was the closest description I had ever found for what I saw as a kid. But even then, mine had details that I still do not hear about often. The ones I saw varied in height and build. Some were smaller, some were taller, some looked thin, others seemed broader, but none of them had specific facial features or clothing. They were shaped like people without being people, and some of them breathed. That is the part that still bothers me. They did not move like normal living things. I never saw them walk across a room, turn their head, lift an arm, or change position. They would just be there, fixed in place, completely still except for the chest. I could see the chest rising and falling, like they were breathing slowly. It made them feel alive in the worst possible way. A statue would have been easier. A shadow stuck on the wall would have been easier. But something standing only a few feet away from you, perfectly still, watching you without a face, while its chest rises and falls like it is alive, is not something a child can easily forget. I saw them until I was about 11 years old. The first one happened in a Motel 6. I was still young, and my family and I were staying there. I remember it being one of those ordinary motel rooms that all look kind of the same. A couple of beds, a TV, a small bathroom area, ugly carpet, plain walls, bags and clothes sitting around because everyone had brought their stuff in. Nothing about it should have felt special. It was just a room we were staying in for the night. I had my GameCube with me, or at least I wanted to use it, and I remember running over to the TV to check the components to see if it was compatible. That was what I cared about in that moment. I was not scared. I was not thinking about ghosts. I was just a kid wanting to hook up a game console. Then I saw her, She was in the form of a woman sprawled face down on the floor. Her body was partly in the bathroom and partly in the hall area. Her hair was fanned out around her head, spread across the floor like she had fallen there and never moved again. She did not seem alive like the others I would see later. She was not breathing, at least not that I remember. She was just there, lying face down, dark and static looking, like a human-shaped shadow had collapsed on the floor. I froze. 1 second I was thinking about my GameCube, and the next I was staring at what looked like a body lying half in the bathroom and half in the hall. I could not understand why no one else was reacting. My family was right there around me. They were in the room. They were not far away. They were close enough that if a real person had been lying on the floor, everyone would have seen her. Someone would have screamed. Someone would have run over. Someone would have called the front desk or the police. But nobody did anything. Because nobody else saw her. That was my first real experience with that awful feeling of being alone in what you are seeing. It is one thing to be scared with other people. It is another thing to point at something terrifying and realize the people around you are looking at you like you are the strange one. I tried to tell them what I saw, but I was a kid, and I did not have the right words. I think I said I saw black people, because that was the only way my child brain knew how to describe these black human-shaped beings. My family laughed. They clowned on me immediately because of how I worded it. To them, it probably sounded funny or ridiculous. Maybe they thought I was talking nonsense. Maybe they thought I had seen a shadow, or clothes on the floor, or something in the room that my imagination turned into a person. Maybe the way I described it made them think it was a joke. But I was not joking. I was trying to explain that there was a blacked-out human body lying on the floor, and no one else could see it. I remember feeling embarrassed and scared at the same time. Scared because of what I saw, and embarrassed because nobody believed me. That is a horrible mix for a child. You learn very quickly that if you talk about these things, people laugh. So you start keeping quiet. You stop asking if anyone else can see it. You just stand there with your fear and try to survive the moment. After that first one, I saw them 3 more times. The ones after the Motel 6 were different because they seemed alive. They were not sprawled on the floor like the woman-shaped one. They were upright, human-shaped, and breathing. I would see their chests rise and fall slowly, like they were calm. Too calm. They never acted startled. They never seemed confused to be seen. They never moved their limbs or changed their position. They were simply there, only feet away from me at times, watching. That is what it felt like. Watching, I know they had no faces, or at least no detailed faces I could see, but I still felt their attention. It is hard to explain how something can watch you without eyes, but anyone who has ever felt stared at from behind might understand a little. Their bodies were turned toward me. Their stillness felt focused. Even without a visible face, I could tell they were aware of me. I could tell I was the reason they were there. The fact that they did not move somehow made them scarier. If they had chased me, at least I would have understood what kind of fear it was. If they had spoken, maybe I would have known what they wanted. If they had reached for me, I could have screamed, run, fought, anything. But they just stood there, breathing, watching, waiting for something I did not understand. Sometimes they were only a few feet away. That distance still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. Seeing something strange across a room is scary. Seeing it close enough that you could reach out and touch it, close enough that it could reach out and touch you if it wanted to, is something else entirely. I would freeze when I saw them. I did not want to move because I did not know if movement would make them react. I did not want to blink because I was afraid they would be closer when I opened my eyes. I did not want to call for anyone because I already knew nobody else would see them. So I learned to endure it. That is a sad thing to say about being a child, but that is what it felt like. I endured them. I waited for them to go away, or for the moment to end, or for someone else to enter the room and make me feel less alone. Sometimes I would look away and look back, hoping they would be gone. Sometimes they were. Sometimes I would close my eyes and try to convince myself they were not real. But they always felt real while I was seeing them. I do not remember every detail of each sighting now, but I remember the feeling clearly. The cold shock, the disbelief, the silence, the way their bodies looked like darkness filled with static, the way their chests rose and fell, the way nobody else ever seemed to notice anything wrong. And then, eventually, I stopped seeing them. I do not know exactly why. The strangest part is that before they stopped, I met this girl who was very odd in a way I did not understand at the time. She was pagan, or at least that was how she described herself, and she had this strange confidence about things most people would never talk about seriously. She told me she was my guardian angel. I did not know what to do with that. It sounded weird, but I had already been seeing weird things for years, so maybe I was more open to listening than I would have been otherwise. She said she locked them away. The shadow people, the beings, whatever they were. I do not know what she meant by that. I do not know if she believed she had done something spiritual, or protective, or magical. I do not know if she was just saying things because she liked sounding mysterious. I do not know if she knew more than she should have known. I only know that after that period of my life, I stopped seeing them. And that has always bothered me too. Because maybe it was coincidence. Maybe I grew out of it. Maybe whatever part of my child brain was creating those visions changed as I got older. Maybe stress, sleep, imagination, or some childhood sensitivity faded away by the time I was around 11. Maybe the girl had nothing to do with it at all. That would be the normal explanation. But part of me still wonders, what if she really did something? What if she really did lock them away? Or worse, what if she did not lock them away, but only made it so I could not see them anymore? That thought scares me more than I like to admit. Because when I was a kid, I thought the fear would end if I stopped seeing them. And mostly, it did. Life became normal. I did not keep finding black static figures standing in rooms. I did not keep seeing faceless beings breathing a few feet away from me. I grew up. I lived my life. I found out other people had stories about shadow people, and I felt less alone, but also more unsettled because it meant maybe I had not imagined everything. But every now and then, I still get the feeling that something is nearby. I do not see them anymore. Not clearly. Not like I did when I was young. But sometimes a room feels wrong for no reason. Sometimes I get that old pressure in the air, like something is standing in a place I am not looking at. Sometimes I wake up with the strange fear that if I turn my head too quickly, I might catch one of them before it has time to hide. And when that happens, I think about the girl who said she locked them away. Then I think, maybe they are not gone. Maybe they just got better at hiding. That is the part that stays with me after all these years. The idea that childhood did not create them, but only allowed me to see them. Maybe children notice things adults cannot. Maybe as we get older, our minds close certain doors. Maybe those things are still there, standing in corners, watching quietly, breathing in the dark. But most people never see them because they do not know how. I know that sounds dramatic. I know it is easier to say I was a kid with an overactive imagination. I know the first sighting could be explained as a shadow in a motel room, the body-like shape of clothes or luggage, some trick of light near the bathroom. I know the later sightings could be blamed on sleepiness, stress, fear, or the mind creating shapes from darkness. I am not blind to those explanations, but I also know what I saw. I saw a woman-shaped black figure lying face down in a Motel 6, half in the bathroom and half in the hall, her hair spread out around her. I saw human-shaped black static beings of different sizes and builds. I saw them breathe. I saw them stand completely still, only feet away from me. I felt them watching me. And I saw them until I was about 11 years old. Then, after meeting a strange pagan girl who told me she was my guardian angel and said she had locked them away, I stopped seeing them. I do not know if that means she helped me, if I grew out of it, or if the things simply decided to stop showing themselves. I do not know if they were spirits, shadow people, something attached to me, something that follows children, or just something the human mind can sometimes perceive when it is young. All I know is that when I was a kid, I saw them. And even now, years later, I sometimes wonder if they are still around me, breathing quietly in places I no longer know how to see. When I was young, I lived in a house that was about 100 years old. It was in a relatively small town, but not out in the quiet country part where houses sit far apart and everything feels isolated. We lived in the more city part of town, if you could really call it that. There was a school nearby, a library close enough that it felt like part of the neighborhood, and enough normal town life around us that the house never seemed cut off from the world. It was not some lonely farmhouse at the end of a dirt road. It was just an old house in an ordinary place. But old houses have a way of feeling different from newer ones. This one definitely did. 100 years is a long time for a house to stand. A lot of people had lived there before us. A lot of families had probably passed through those rooms. A lot of ordinary days, arguments, sickness, laughter, grief, and quiet nights had happened inside those walls long before I was born. Even as a kid, I think I felt that in some way. The house had its own mood. It had sounds that seemed to belong only to it. During the day, it was just home. We lived there like any family would. People came and went. We ate, slept, watched TV, did homework, argued, laughed, and went through normal life. Nothing about it felt too strange when the sun was up. But at night, when the house got quiet, it changed. The same rooms felt bigger. The same hallway seemed longer. The same ceiling above my head became something I listened to without meaning to. And that was when I would sometimes hear the marble. That is the best way I can describe the sound. It sounded exactly like a marble rolling across the ceiling. Not a mouse, not footsteps, not pipes ticking, not the house settling with a quick crack or pop. It sounded like a small, hard ball, something glass or ceramic, rolling slowly across a flat surface above me. Sometimes it would start faintly, like a tiny click or tap, and then I would hear that smooth rolling sound moving from one side to the other. It had a very clear direction to it. It did not just happen in one spot. It seemed to travel across the ceiling. The strangest part was the angle. The sound would move diagonally, crossing against the ceiling joists in a way that did not make much sense. It was not like something rolling along a beam. It sounded like it was moving across the structure, as if there were some hidden floor above the ceiling where a marble had been set loose and was rolling on its own path. I could lie there in the dark and follow it with my ears, waiting for it to slow down or stop. Sometimes it would stop suddenly. Sometimes it would fade. Sometimes there would be one little tap at the end, like the marble had hit something and settled. Then silence would come back, and the house would feel even quieter than before. At first, I tried to tell myself it was just an old house making old house noises. Everyone says that about old houses. They settle. They creak. Wood expands and contracts. Pipes make noise. Animals get into walls. Wind pushes things around. There is always some normal reason people can offer. But this sound was so specific that the usual explanations never felt right to me. The house had tall walls, and for some reason, the ceiling had been furred down by about 2 feet. That meant there was a hidden space above the visible ceiling, which might sound like an easy explanation at first. Maybe there really was a marble up there. Maybe some kid from long before us had dropped one into the ceiling space. Maybe every now and then it rolled around when the house shifted. But the more I thought about that, the less it made sense. An actual marble would need a surface to roll on. It would need a reason to move. It would not just roll diagonally across ceiling joists in the middle of the night without something pushing it. The sound did not match something trapped and randomly shifting either. It had movement. It had the clean, steady roll of an object crossing a space. And if there had really been a marble in that hidden ceiling area, why would it move the way it did? Why would it happen only sometimes? Why did it sound so deliberate? Then there was the water hammer explanation. That is another common one people bring up when houses make strange knocking or rolling sounds. Plumbing can do weird things. Water moving through pipes can create bangs, taps, or rattles. Old pipes especially can make sounds that seem like they are coming from somewhere else. For a while I considered that too, because I wanted a normal answer. But the plumbing did not fit. The house had a basement and a crawl space, and the plumbing was below us. There were no overhead pipes where the sound was coming from. If it had been water hammer, I would have expected the noise to come from walls or lower areas, or at least from places where pipes actually existed. But this sound was clearly above, across the ceiling. It did not sound like pipes banging. It sounded like a marble rolling. Other piping did not explain it either. There were no air conditioning pipes overhead. The house was cooled by a swamp cooler, or sometimes not cooled at all, depending on the time and setup. There was no ductwork above the ceiling that could explain a rolling sound. No hidden act pipes, no overhead system making strange mechanical noises. The more explanations I looked for, the more each one seemed to fall apart. My older brother and one of his friends added to the creepiness of the place by saying they had seen a ghost in the attic space. I did not see that myself, so I cannot say exactly what happened with them. Maybe they really saw something. Maybe they scared themselves. Maybe they were messing around and turned a shadow into a story. But once a house already has strange noises at night, Any story about a ghost in the attic starts to feel more believable than it should. My dad, instead of shutting the whole thing down, gave the ghost a name. He called him Alfredo. That was very much my dad's style. Instead of saying, "Stop being ridiculous, there are no ghosts," he leaned into it. He egged the story on. He made Alfredo part of the house's personality, like some weird, unseen roommate who lived above us and rolled marbles around at night. In a way, that made it less scary because it gave the unknown thing a silly name. It is harder to be terrified of a ghost named Alfredo, but it also made the whole thing feel more real. Once something has a name, even a joking one, it becomes part of the family's shared world. So the sound became Alfredo. If something rolled across the ceiling, maybe Alfredo was up there. If something strange happened, maybe Alfredo was messing around. My dad's joking probably helped keep the fear from becoming too heavy. But as a kid lying in bed at night, listening to that marble sound roll above me, I was not always comforted by the joke. Sometimes a funny name does not make a dark ceiling feel any less mysterious. I would lie there and listen, trying not to move. The house would be quiet around me, and then that sound would start. A small, hard object rolling. Smooth, slow, clear, across the ceiling, not along the joists, but against them. Sometimes I imagined an actual marble up there, moving through that hidden 2-foot space. Sometimes I imagined a child in the attic, playing with it. Sometimes I imagined a hand setting it down and giving it a little push just to see if I was listening. That was the worst thought, because the sound did not feel random. It felt like something being done. I know that is not proof of anything. It is just a feeling. Old houses can create sounds that seem intentional when they are not. Your mind hears a pattern and turns it into a story. A creak becomes a footstep. A pipe becomes a knock. A rolling sound becomes a marble. Maybe that is all this was. Maybe there was some structural reason no one ever figured out. Maybe temperature changes in the hidden ceiling space caused something to shift in a way that created the sound. Maybe a piece of old hardware or debris rolled slightly when the house expanded or contracted. Maybe there was an explanation that would be boring if someone had opened the ceiling and found it. But I never found that explanation. And the explanations I could think of never worked. It was not an actual marble, at least not in any way that made sense with the ceiling structure and the direction of the sound. It was not water hammer, because the plumbing was below and there were no overhead pipes. It was not air conditioning ductwork or cooling pipes, because the house did not have that setup. It was not a simple creak or pop, because it had the distinct sound of a small round object rolling over a surface. It was just the marble sound, again and again, at night, in that old house. I think what made it so memorable was that it was not dramatic. Nothing flew across the room. No doors slammed. No shadow figure stood at the end of my bed. No voice whispered my name. It was only a sound. But sometimes a sound is enough. A sound can make a house feel occupied. A sound can make you aware of all the hidden spaces around you, all the parts of a house you cannot see. The walls, the attic, the ceiling gaps, the crawl space, the dark corners behind old wood and plaster. That old house had too many hidden spaces. The furred-down ceiling especially bothered me. Knowing there were about 2 feet of space above the ceiling made my imagination worse. It was not a full attic where someone could stand, but it was enough space to feel like something could be there. Something small. Something moving. Something just out of sight. I could look up at the ceiling and know there was a gap above it, a hidden layer between me and the actual structure of the house. And somewhere in that hidden layer, at least according to what my ears told me, something rolled. My brother's attic story made that even worse. If he and his friend really had seen something up there, then maybe the marble sound was connected. If they had imagined it, then maybe the house was just good at making people imagine things. Either way, the result was the same. The house had a reputation inside our family. It had a name for its ghost. Alfredo, it had a sound that came at night. I do not remember being terrified every single time it happened, but I remember being uneasy. There is a difference. Terror is sharp and quick. Unease sits with you. It becomes part of how you experience a place. You can live normally during the day and still know that when night comes, the house might start doing that thing again. You learn to wait for it. You learn to listen. You learn that some sounds are normal and one sound is not. Even now, I can still imagine it. The quiet house, the old walls, the hallway, the bedrooms, the ceiling above me. Then that tiny, hard rolling sound moving slowly across the space overhead. A marble that should not be there, moving in a direction it should not move. Above a room where no one was walking and no pipes were running. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe Alfredo was only a family joke that made an old house noise easier to talk about. Maybe my brother and his friend saw a shadow in the attic and turned it into a ghost story. Maybe the house had some strange construction detail that made the sound, and if a contractor had looked closely enough, they could have explained it in 5 minutes. But I never got that explanation. All I know is that when I was young, and I once ended up in the middle of a massive drug raid, and the strangest part is that I had no idea what was happening until it was already happening around me. I was not part of some dramatic criminal plan. I was not sitting there waiting for police to kick the doors in. I was not expecting anything unusual at all. One moment I was at the factory, just there like it was any other day. And the next moment the whole place was being hit by police in what turned out to be a huge multi-million-dollar drug raid. When something like that happens, your brain takes a while to catch up. People think they know how they would react when armed police come in, when everyone starts shouting, when the whole place suddenly turns into chaos. But when you are actually in it, especially when you have no idea what is going on, everything feels unreal. The sounds are too loud. The movements are too fast. You keep waiting for someone to explain the mistake, because surely there has been a mistake. Surely this cannot have anything to do with you. But nobody stops to explain anything. They just move you where they want you, cuff you, control the space, and treat every person there like they might be involved until they decide otherwise. I was 27 at the time, old enough to understand that the situation was serious, but still young enough to be shocked by how quickly your life can become part of something much bigger than you. The factory was being raided, and I was just there, completely unaware of whatever had brought the task force down on the place. It was not some small search either. This was big. There were officers everywhere. Uniforms, detectives, people moving in and out. The kind of operation where you can feel that a lot of planning happened before anyone arrived. It was one of those raids where the police already knew what they were looking for before anyone inside even understood what was going on. I ended up outside in cuffs. That part was bad enough on its own, but the weather made it worse. It was freezing, and it was raining. Not a light drizzle that you can ignore, but cold rain that gets into your clothes and stays there. I was not dressed for standing outside for hours. I did not have much on, not enough to handle that kind of cold, and once the rain soaked into me, it felt like it was pulling the heat straight out of my body. When you are handcuffed and standing outside in weather like that, you feel helpless in a very basic way. You cannot warm yourself properly. You cannot cover yourself. You cannot just decide to leave. You are stuck where someone else put you. At first, there was so much going on that I was more confused than anything. Officers were moving around, people were being dealt with, the factory was being searched, questions were being asked, things were being brought out or looked through. Everyone had a role except the people in cuffs, who were just left waiting. Waiting is one of the worst parts, because you have nothing to do but think. You think about why you are there. You think about whether anyone believes you had nothing to do with it. You think about how long it will take before someone finally works out that you are not who they are looking for. Then the cold starts becoming the only thing you can think about. After a few hours outside in the freezing rain, I was miserable. My clothes were wet. My body was shaking. My skin felt tight and numb in places. I was cold enough that it started to feel dangerous, not just uncomfortable. And at some point, the officer who had been watching me was not paying attention. I do not know if he got distracted, if he assumed I was not going anywhere, or if the chaos of the raid pulled him away for a moment. But I found myself left unattended. I did not try to run. That would have been stupid. I was not thinking about escaping. I was thinking about getting out of the rain. So I slowly sidled back into the small warehouse area for cover. It was not some dramatic move. I was not sneaking like a movie character. I was cold, wet, cuffed, and trying to get under a roof. I just wanted to stop being battered by the weather for a minute. The warehouse was nearby, and I moved back inside enough to get some shelter. I thought maybe no one would care, or maybe someone would just tell me to get back outside. I was not expecting to see anything important. But that was when I saw them. Inside the warehouse, I saw two detectives. They were part of the state task force, and the second I saw their faces, I recognized them. That recognition hit me harder than the raid itself. These were not just random officers I had never seen before. These were faces I knew, but not in the way you expect to know police. I recognized them from years before, going all the way back to the start of my teenage life. They had been around, not openly as police, not in uniforms, not standing in the obvious role they were standing in now. They had existed on the edges of my life, in and out of the scene in that city, showing up here and there over the years like they were just people. That is a hard thing to explain unless you have lived in a city with a certain kind of scene. There are people who are always around but never fully central. You see them at places. You hear their names. They drift in and out of groups. They know people. People know them. They are not your close friends, but they become familiar over time because they keep appearing near the edges of everyone's lives. You accept them as part of the background. You do not question them because they are just there. These two had been like that. For decades, on and off, they had been around the edges. They had moved through the same circles, the same city, the same loose world of people connected by nightlife, parties, drugs, music, trouble, friendships, rumors, and all the messy stuff that makes up a scene. I had seen them over the years. I could place their faces back to when I was a teenager. They were not strangers to me. And now, they were standing there as detectives in a state task force raid. For a second, I think all of us understood what had happened at the same time. I had seen them. I was not supposed to see them. Their reaction told me that immediately. They panicked. Not in a way most people would notice from far away, maybe, but from where I was, it was obvious. They covered their faces. They turned away. They shouted for uniformed officers to get me out of there. The energy changed instantly. They were not just annoyed that a cuffed person had stepped into the wrong area. They were alarmed because I had recognized them. That was when it clicked. They had been undercover, not just for a short operation. not just wearing plain clothes for a day or two. These people had been embedded around the scene, on and off, for years, maybe longer. They had been living close to people's lives, close enough to be recognized, close enough to be accepted as part of the background, and all that time, they were connected to law enforcement. Seeing them in that warehouse exposed something I was never meant to know. It was a classic uniform error. That is the best way I can describe it. Someone in uniform left me unattended, or did not realize where I could wander, and I ended up seeing faces I was not supposed to see. It was probably a small mistake in the middle of a big operation. To the uniformed officer, I was just another person in cuffs trying to get out of the rain. But to those detectives, it was a serious problem. Their cover, their history, their ability to move through that world without being identified, all of it depended on people like me not seeing them standing there in an official role. I was escorted out quickly after that. The way they reacted stayed with me. They did not calmly tell me to leave. They did not act like nothing happened. They covered their faces and got me removed from the area. That told me more than any explanation would have. They knew I knew. They knew I had recognized them. And they knew I understood what that meant. Standing outside again, cold and wet, I kept replaying their faces in my head. It was surreal. People I had seen around since my teenage years were suddenly police. Not just police, but state task force detectives involved in a major drug raid. It made me question so many memories. Every time I had seen them before, what were they doing? Who were they watching? What conversations had they been part of? How many people had trusted them? How long had they been operating around everyone? How much of the scene had they seen from the inside? That is the part people do not always understand about undercover work. From the outside, it sounds clean and dramatic, like something from a show. Someone puts on a disguise, gets information, makes arrests, and the story ends. But in real life, it is much messier. Undercover officers do not just appear for one scene and vanish. Sometimes they live on the edge of people's lives for years. They become familiar. They drink with people, talk with people, attend gatherings, stand in corners, hear things, see things, and become part of the social fabric without ever really being part of it. It changes the way you remember your own life when you realize someone like that was always nearby. I was not supposed to see behind the curtain. That was what made the moment so strange. Most people never find out who was undercover around them. The operation ends, arrests happen, rumors spread, but the faces stay hidden. In my case, I got dragged into a raid I did not even know was coming, left outside in the freezing rain, and then by chance stepped into the wrong space at the wrong time. That one little movement back into the warehouse showed me something I was never meant to see. And they knew it. Their panic made it real. I have seen a lot more than that over the years, but that moment stands out because it showed me how deep some things go. It is one thing to know in a general way that undercover officers exist. Everyone knows that. It is another thing to recognize them personally from years of your own life. It is another thing to see people you thought were just part of the city scene suddenly covering their faces because their actual role has been exposed in front of you. It made the whole world feel less stable for a while. After that, I did not look at people the same way. I became more aware of the ones who drift in and out, the ones who never seem fully attached but always seem nearby. Maybe that is paranoia. Maybe it is just what happens after you accidentally identify undercovers. But once you know that people can live on the edge of your world for years while hiding who they really are, you cannot fully unknow it. The raid itself was already intense. Being cuffed outside in freezing rain for hours, not properly dressed, not knowing what was happening, waiting for someone to decide what to do with you. That is something I would not forget anyway. But the detectives made it something else entirely. The raid became more than police hitting a factory. It became a glimpse into a hidden layer of the city I had been living around since I was a teenager. Those two faces connected different parts of my life in a way I did not want. I thought back to teenage years, to the scene, to people coming and going, to faces you see often enough to remember, but not enough to question. I thought about how they had been there, on and off, in the background, while everyone else lived their lives like normal. I thought about how many times they must have been gathering information, watching, listening, building trust, then disappearing until the next time. It was unsettling in a way that is hard to describe. Not supernatural, not a ghost story. At the time, I did not know what I had seen. I kept trying to tell myself there had to be a normal explanation. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was dehydrated. Maybe my brain had taken a quick glimpse of someone and turned it into something stranger than it really was. I was out walking alone, pushing myself harder than I usually did, and it would have been easy to blame my body or my mind. But a few days later, when I saw the reports about bodies being found along Buffalo Bayou, the whole memory changed. What I thought might have been a trick of the eyes suddenly felt like something else, something much darker, something I still do not know how to explain. It happened in Houston, at Memorial Park, late in the afternoon during the fall. It was one of those cold, muddy days where the whole world looks damp and tired. The kind of day where the trees are bare enough to make everything feel open, but the woods still seem thick in places. The ground was soft from moisture, and the path had that wet dirt smell that gets stronger when the weather turns cold. It was not a bright, cheerful walk. It was gray, chilly, and quiet in the way wooded areas can get when the day is starting to fade. I was there because I was forcing myself to do cardio. That was the whole reason. I was not out there looking for anything strange. I was not ghost hunting. I was not exploring some creepy abandoned place. I was just trying to make myself walk for an hour because I knew I needed the exercise. I had my music on, and I was moving along the trails, trying to keep a steady pace even though I was out of shape and not exactly enjoying it. Sometimes when you are forcing yourself to walk, you stop paying attention to anything except the time, your breathing, and how much longer you have to keep going. Memorial Park has some wooded areas along Buffalo Bayou, and parts of it can feel surprisingly removed from the city, even though you are still in Houston. There are decent walking paths, but the trees and brush can make certain sections feel more closed in. The trail bends and curves, and sometimes the next stretch ahead is partly hidden by branches. You can be walking in a place that feels normal 1 minute, then come around a curve and feel like you are suddenly alone in the woods. That day, I was moving along one of those paths, listening to music, when I noticed a curve up ahead. It was partially obscured by tree branches, enough that I could not see the whole stretch beyond it clearly. The path was muddy, and the ground around it was soft. I remember that, because it mattered later. If someone had been standing there or running through that area, there should have been marks, footprints, disturbed mud. Something, as I got closer, I suddenly saw a girl. She was about 30 yards ahead of me. She looked like a teenage Hispanic girl, and the first thing I noticed was that she looked scared, not just startled because a stranger was walking toward her, scared in a deeper way. She looked roughed up, like something bad had happened to her, like she had been beaten or had been running or had been through something terrible before I saw her. Her appearance hit me so fast that I did not even have time to fully understand what I was looking at. 1 second, the trail ahead was just the trail, and the next second, she was there, standing in front of me. We made eye contact. That is the part I remember most clearly. She saw me, and I saw her. It was not a blur in the corner of my eye. It was not a shape I only half noticed. We looked directly at each other. For that brief moment, there was no doubt in my mind that she was real. She was standing there ahead of me on that muddy path, frightened and silent, looking right at me. Then she ran. She sprinted away from me without making a sound. That was strange by itself. If she was a real person who had been hurt, I would have expected some kind of noise. A gasp, a cry, footsteps slapping through mud, branches breaking, something. But I do not remember hearing anything from her. She just turned and ran like she was terrified of being seen, or terrified of me, or terrified of something behind her that I could not see. She moved fast, and within moments she was gone from my view. At first, I thought I had just scared someone. Maybe she had been hiding there. Maybe she was in trouble and did not know if I was safe. Maybe she was a runaway. Maybe she was being chased by someone. Maybe she had been attacked and panicked when she saw me. Those thoughts started coming all at once, and I moved toward the place where she had been standing because I wanted to understand what was happening. When I reached the spot, there was nothing. No girl. No sound of someone running away through the trees. No movement in the brush. And no footprints in the mud. That was when the whole situation turned cold for me. The ground was muddy. I had been leaving marks myself as I walked. If she had been standing where I saw her, there should have been footprints. If she had sprinted away, there should have been a trail of them, especially because she looked like she had taken off quickly. Mud remembers movement. It holds the shape of shoes, slides, steps, and panic. But where she had been, there was nothing. No marks, no disturbed ground, nothing to show that a person had stood there 30 yards ahead of me and then run away. I stood there looking around, trying to make it make sense. My first instinct was still to explain it away. Maybe I had misjudged the distance. Maybe she had been on a drier patch. Maybe the mud was not as soft where she stood. Maybe I did not look closely enough. Maybe she had run onto part of the trail where leaves covered the ground. Maybe my music had blocked the sound of her footsteps. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. Maybe I was dehydrated, and my mind had played a trick on me. That was the explanation I kept coming back to, because it was the easiest one. I told myself maybe I had seen a person for 1 second, and then imagined the rest. Or maybe I had seen a branch, a shadow, a person farther away, something moving in the trees, and my brain turned it into a scared teenage girl because I was tired and out there alone. I did not like that explanation, but I liked it better than the alternative. The alternative was that I had seen someone who was there and not there at the same time. I kept walking after that. I did not know what else to do. There was no one to help because there was no girl. There were no tracks to follow. There was nothing around me but the muddy path, the trees, the cold air, and the feeling that I had just seen something I was not supposed to see. My music was still playing, but it felt different now. The woods felt different too. A few minutes earlier, I had only been thinking about cardio and how much longer I needed to walk. Now, I was watching every curve in the trail and looking into the branches, half expecting to see her again. I ended up walking longer than I planned, around 90 minutes total, and eventually I trudged my out-of-shape ass back to my truck. By then, I had mostly convinced myself that my mind had messed with me. I was tired, maybe dehydrated, maybe the cold and the muddy path and the music had put me in a strange headspace. People see things sometimes. It happens. I wanted that to be the answer. Still, the image stayed with me. The scared girl, the roughed-up look, the eye contact, the silent sprint. the empty mud. A few days later, the news reports came out. Dead bodies had been found along Buffalo Bayou in the area where I had been walking. When I saw that, I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. The reports talked about remains being found near the bayou, and then older reports about a missing teen resurfaced. There was talk that her body may have been among the bones found. Police were looking, or possibly still looking, into the possibility of a serial killer dumping bodies in Buffalo Bayou. I remember reading or hearing about it and suddenly thinking back to that girl on the trail. My first thought was, holy shit, that may have been a ghost. I do not know how else to describe the feeling. It was like the memory had been sitting in one box in my mind, labeled weird thing I saw while tired. And then the news ripped the label off and replaced it with something much worse. Suddenly, the location mattered. The way she looked mattered. The fact that she seemed scared mattered. The lack of footprints mattered even more. What if I had not seen a living girl at all? What if I had seen someone connected to what had happened there? Someone who had been hurt, killed, and left near that bayou. That thought still makes me uncomfortable. I am not saying I know for sure that is what happened. I do not want to pretend I have proof. I did not get a photo. I did not speak to her. I did not see where she went. I cannot say she was the missing teen from the news. I cannot even say for sure that what I saw was not some strange trick of my own mind. But the timing, the place, and the way she appeared and vanished all feel hard to ignore. The part that bothers me the most is the mud. If she had been a real person, there should have been footprints. Maybe not perfect ones, but something. The ground was soft. I was aware of it because I had been walking through it myself. A scared teenager sprinting away would not leave nothing behind. There should have been marks where she stood. There should have been at least a few steps leading away. There should have been evidence that she had been there. There was none. And then, days later, bodies were found in that area. I keep thinking about the way she looked at me. Her expression was not curious. It was not blank. It was fear. She looked like someone who had already been through something terrible and did not trust anyone anymore. When she ran, she did not call for help. She did not wave. She did not speak. She just ran away silently, like the only thing she knew to do was disappear. Maybe that is exactly what she had done before. Maybe that was the last thing she knew. I hate thinking that. But it is where my mind goes. It also makes me wonder why I saw her. Was it just random? Was I in the right place at the wrong time? Was I tired enough to notice something I normally would not have? Or was there some part of her still stuck there, repeating that moment, running from anyone who came too close? I do not know. I do not even know if I believe in ghosts in the usual sense. But after something like that, belief becomes less simple. You can tell yourself you are rational, and then the world gives you a moment that does not fit inside rational explanations. If I had not seen the news, I might have eventually convinced myself it was nothing. I might have forgotten most of it. I might have turned it into a quick story about how I thought I saw a girl in the woods while I was dehydrated. But the news changed it. It gave the location a horrible meaning. It connected my strange sighting to real death, real missing people, and a real fear that someone had been using that area to dump bodies. That is not the kind of thing you forget. Now, whenever I think of Memorial Park or Buffalo Bayou, I do not just think of walking trails and trees. I think of that cold fall afternoon. I think of the muddy path. I think of the curve partly hidden by branches. I think of seeing a scared teenage girl about 30 yards ahead of me, looking roughed up and terrified. I think of our eyes meeting for one silent second before she sprinted away. And I think of reaching the spot where she had been and finding no footprints at all. Maybe my mind was messing with me. Maybe I was tired, dehydrated, and seeing things. Maybe there's some normal explanation I will never know. But a few days later, when the reports came out about bodies being found along Buffalo Bayou, and when the story of a missing teen came back up, I could not shake the feeling that I had seen something connected to it. Maybe it was a ghost. Maybe it was a warning. Maybe it was just a broken little echo of someone's last fear. Whatever it was, I know what I saw on that trail, and I have never been able to fully explain it. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. I have lived in two very old houses, and both of them gave me experiences that I have never been able to fully explain. I know old houses naturally feel different from newer ones. They settle, creak, and carry the weight of all the people who lived there before. The air can feel thicker. The rooms can feel like they have memories in them. But what happened in those two houses went beyond normal old house feelings. One experience felt dark and threatening. The other felt quiet and almost innocent. Both stayed with me. The first house was old enough that it had that heavy feeling some older homes have at night. During the day, it was just a house. We lived there, cooked there, cleaned there, raised kids there, and went through regular life. But at night, when everything became still, the place felt different. The corners seemed darker. The rooms felt deeper. It was the kind of house where you could wake up in the middle of the night and instantly feel like you were not alone, even before you saw or heard anything. One night, I woke up and saw a dark presence standing in the corner of my room. It was shaped like a man. I could not see details. It was not like looking at a normal person standing there in the dark. There was no clear face, no clothing, no expression I could identify. It was more like a black, man-shaped form standing in the corner, watching me. But even without seeing a face, I could feel its attention. It was looking at me. I knew it was looking at me. The feeling that came from it was very ominous. That is the best word for it. It was not just startling. It was not like seeing a shadow and realizing your eyes were playing tricks on you. It felt heavy, dark, and wrong. The room felt colder in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. My body reacted before my mind could make sense of it. I woke up fully, frozen in place, staring at that shape in the corner, trying to decide if I was truly seeing it or if I was still trapped in some half-dream state. I had felt strange presences before, years earlier, and I had talked about it with my therapist. I know some people might find that odd, but she was someone I trusted, and she did not laugh at me or treat me like I was crazy. She had her own experiences, too. She and her husband had lived in a house where they had so many unexplained things happen that they eventually called a priest. So when I told her about feeling dark energy or strange presences, she took it seriously. She told me that if I ever felt a dark energy like that again, I should say, only benevolent spirits are welcome here. It was a simple sentence, but she said it with enough confidence that I remembered it. She told me not to give fear too much power, and not to let anything dark feel welcome around me. Whether someone believes in spirits or not, there is something steadying about claiming your space when you feel scared. It gives you something to do instead of just lying there helpless. But the presence in that room felt much darker than anything I had felt before. That was what scared me most. I had experienced strange things in the past, but this felt different. It did not feel curious. It did not feel lost. It did not feel like some harmless presence passing through. It felt heavy and hostile, like it had no good reason to be there. I did not want it in the room with me. I did not want it near my family. I did not want to find out what would happen if I stayed silent. So I did what my therapist had told me to do. I looked toward that dark figure and said only benevolent spirits are welcome here. Then I prayed. I asked for protection. I asked for anything good, anything holy, anything loving to protect me and my home. I do not remember every word I said because I was scared, but I remember the intention behind it. I wanted that presence gone. I wanted to make it clear that whatever it was not welcome there. After that, I went back to sleep. That might sound strange, but sometimes when something terrifying happens, your body and mind just cannot stay in that state forever. I had said what I needed to say. I had prayed. I had done the only thing I knew how to do. And somehow, I was able to sleep again. The presence did not return, at least not to me in that way. Later, I told my kids what had happened. I did not expect much of a reaction. I think part of me wanted someone to say it was just a dream, or that I had imagined it, because that would have made the whole thing easier to carry. But my son told me it had happened to him too. That hit me hard. It is one thing to have a strange experience by yourself. You can question your own mind. You can tell yourself you were tired, stressed, half asleep, or dreaming. But when someone else in the same house tells you they experienced something similar, it changes things. It makes the house feel different. It makes the presence feel less like something inside your mind and more like something that was actually there. I do not know what my son saw or felt in every detail, but the fact that he said it had happened to him too made me believe even more that something dark had been in that house. The second house was different. It was even older, over 125 years old. A house that old has seen generations come and go. It was built in a time when the world looked completely different. People were born, lived, suffered, celebrated, and died long before we ever walked through the door. I have always thought homes like that hold layers of energy, even if I cannot explain what that means in any scientific way. They feel full, even when they are empty. One night in that second house, I fell asleep with the light on. I do not remember why. Maybe I was tired and meant to turn it off, but fell asleep first. Maybe I had been reading. Maybe I was just exhausted and did not care. Whatever the reason, the room was lit when I woke up. And when I opened my eyes, there was a little boy standing next to me. He looked about 3 or 4 years old. He was blond, with big curls in his hair, and he was wearing a sailor suit. It looked like the kind of outfit children wore in the 1800s. Not modern at all. It was very distinct. the sort of old-fashioned clothing you might see in antique photographs of children from another century. I could see him clearly enough to notice those details, and that is what made the experience feel so strange. He was not threatening. That was the biggest difference between him and the dark presence from the first house. The little boy did not feel malevolent. He did not feel angry or dangerous. He just seemed curious, like he was standing there, looking at me, wondering who I was or why I was in the room. There was no hatred coming from him, no darkness, no heavy, ominous feeling. If anything, he seemed calm. I was startled, of course. Anyone would be. Waking up and seeing a child standing next to your bed is not normal, especially when you know there should not be a child there. But I was not filled with the same fear I had felt with the dark man-shaped presence. This felt different. Strange, yes. Unsettling, yes, but not evil. I looked at him for a moment, trying to understand what I was seeing. Then I turned off the light and went back to sleep. I know that sounds almost too calm, but that is what happened. Maybe I was too tired to react more strongly. Maybe because he did not feel dangerous, I did not feel the need to panic. Maybe some part of me understood that he was only passing through, or only observing. I do not know. But I remember feeling like he was not there to hurt me. He was just there. By morning, the room was normal again. No little boy, no sound, no explanation. That experience stayed with me because it was so clear and so specific. A blonde child with curls, wearing a sailor's suit from another time, standing by my bed in a house more than 125 years old. It did not feel like a random dream image. It felt like seeing someone who had once belonged to that house, or at least to that time. A child who may have lived there, visited there, or somehow remained connected to the place. Both of these experiences happened in the same city, Saginaw, Michigan. Both houses were only a few miles from a section of the city called Old Town. At the time, I did not think too much about that connection. I knew the houses were old, and I knew Saginaw had a lot of history. But I did not know much beyond that. Many years later, I came across a series of documentaries focused on haunted Saginaw by Steve Prozac Shippey. One of them was called A Haunting on Hamilton Street. When I found those documentaries, it made me think back to the houses I had lived in. Both of them were within a couple of miles of that area. I am not saying that proves anything, but it made the memories feel connected to something bigger. Like maybe the strange things I experienced were not isolated. Maybe that part of Saginaw had more history, more pain, more lingering energy than I had understood at the time. Old cities can be like that. They carry stories in their streets. Houses get torn down, rebuilt, painted over, sold, and rented again, but the history underneath does not always disappear. Families live and die there. Children grow up there. People lose loved ones there. Arguments happen. Illness happens. Joy happens. Tragedy happens. And sometimes, maybe, certain moments or presences stay behind. I do not know exactly what I believe. The dark man-shaped figure in the first house felt like something that should not have been there. It felt ominous and unwelcome. When I told it that only benevolent spirits were welcome and prayed for protection, it did not come back to me. That experience made me feel like some presences can carry a very dark energy, and that it is important to protect yourself from them. The little boy in the second house felt completely different. He did not feel like a threat. He felt curious, almost innocent. I do not know who he was or why he was standing beside me, but I did not feel the same danger from him. If he was a spirit, maybe he was only wondering about the person sleeping in the room. Maybe he was attached to the house. Maybe he did not even know how much time had passed. What stays with me most is how different the two encounters felt. The first was fear, the kind of fear that tightens your chest and makes the air feel heavy. A dark shape in the corner, watching, bringing a sense of something wrong into the room. The second was surprise. A small blond boy in old-fashioned clothes, standing beside me with no evil feeling at all. Strange, but not terrifying in the same way. Both were impossible to explain. Both happened in very old houses. And both happened in a city that I later learned had a whole reputation for hauntings. Maybe old houses simply make people see things because they already feel haunted. Maybe a sleepy mind fills shadows with figures. Maybe history and imagination work together in places like that. I understand those explanations. I really do. But I also know what I felt. I know the darkness of that man-shaped presence in the corner. I know the calm curiosity of the little boy standing beside me. I know my son said he had experienced the dark presence too. And I know that after learning more about haunted Saginaw and the Hamilton Street area, I could never fully dismiss the idea that those houses, and maybe that whole part of the city, had more going on than most people would ever notice. I have lived in two very old houses in my life, and both of them left me with memories that I still cannot fully explain. I know old houses can naturally feel strange. They creak at night, the floors settle, the walls make sounds when the weather changes, and sometimes the air in certain rooms feels heavier than it should. A lot of people hear things in old houses and immediately blame ghosts, but I have always tried to be reasonable about it. I know there are normal explanations for many things, but what happened to me in those two houses did not feel like pipes, shadows, old wood, or my imagination. Both experiences felt real in very different ways, and both happened in Saginaw, Michigan, only a few miles from an area people called Old Town. The first house had a different feeling at night. During the day, it was normal enough. Life went on the way it does in any home. There were regular chores, family routines, kids moving around, meals being made, and all the ordinary noise that makes a house feel lived in. But once it got late and the house became quiet, the mood changed. I cannot say it felt haunted all the time, but there were moments when the darkness in the rooms felt too thick, like the house was holding something inside it. One night I woke up in my room and saw a dark figure standing in the corner. It was shaped like a man. I could not see a face. I could not make out clothes, eyes, hair, or any normal human details. It was more like a dark, man-shaped presence, standing upright in the corner of the room and looking directly at me. Even though I could not see its eyes, I knew it was watching me. That feeling was immediate. It was not like waking up confused and slowly realizing something was there. I opened my eyes and felt it right away. Something was in the room with me, and its attention was fixed on me. The presence felt extremely ominous. That is the best word I can use for it. It did not feel like a harmless shadow. It did not feel like a lost spirit or something curious passing through. It felt dark, heavy, and deeply unwelcome. I had experienced strange presences before in my life, but this one felt much darker than any of those. The air around it seemed wrong. I remember feeling fear in my body before I even had time to think. My chest tightened, and I lay there staring at it, trying to understand whether I was awake, dreaming, or stuck somewhere between the two. Years before that, I had talked to my therapist about similar experiences. She was not the kind of person who laughed at things like that. She had actually lived in a house where she and her husband had so many occurrences that they eventually called a priest. Because of that, when I spoke to her about feeling dark energy or sensing presences around me, she took it seriously. She gave me advice that stayed with me. She told me that if I ever felt something dark around me again, I should firmly state, only benevolent spirits are welcome here. At the time, I remembered her saying that, but I never knew if I would actually use it. It is one thing to talk about something like that in a calm room with another person. It is very different to wake up alone in the dark and see a man's shaped presence standing in the corner of your bedroom. In that moment, fear makes everything harder. Your mind wants to freeze. Your body wants to hide. Part of you wants to close your eyes and hope it disappears, but another part of you is afraid that if you stop looking, it might come closer. But I did what she had told me to do. I told it. Only benevolent spirits are welcome here. Then I prayed. I asked for protection. I asked for safety. I asked for whatever was watching over me to keep anything dark away from me and my home. I do not remember the exact words of the prayer now, but I remember the feeling behind it. I was not trying to communicate with the presence. I was not inviting it in or asking it questions. I was setting a boundary. I wanted it gone. I wanted it to understand that it did not belong there. After I said that and prayed, I somehow went back to sleep. That might sound strange, but sometimes the mind can only handle so much fear at once. I had done the only thing I knew to do. I had said the words my therapist taught me, asked for protection, and trusted that whatever was there would not be allowed to stay. When I woke up again, the presence was gone. It did not return to me after that. Later, I told my kids what had happened. I expected them to be surprised, maybe even skeptical. I thought they might tell me I had dreamed it or that I had seen a shadow in the corner. But when I told my son, he said it had happened to him too. That made the whole thing feel even more real. When something happens only to you, it is easy to question yourself. You can blame sleep, stress, imagination, or the strange way the mind works in the dark. But when someone else in the same house tells you they experienced the same kind of thing, it becomes harder to dismiss. My son had felt or seen that dark presence too. That meant it was not only in my head. Something about that house had affected more than one person. The second house was even older. It was more than 125 years old. A house that old has seen generations pass through it. People had lived there long before us. Children had probably been born or raised there. Families had probably sat in those rooms, argued in those rooms, cried in those rooms, and maybe even died in those rooms. I do not say that to be dramatic. It is simply what happens when a house stands for that long. It collects history. The experience I had in that second house was very different from the first. It was not dark in the same way. It did not feel threatening. It was strange, but it did not feel evil. One night, I fell asleep with the light on. I do not remember exactly why. Maybe I was reading, maybe I was tired, or maybe I simply forgot to turn it off. Whatever the reason, the room was lit when I woke up. I opened my eyes and saw a little boy standing next to me. He looked about 3 or 4 years old. He had blonde hair with big curls, the kind of curls you might see in very old photographs of children from another era. He was wearing a sailor suit, the style that was popular for children during the 1800s. That detail stood out to me immediately because it looked so old-fashioned. It was not something a modern child would normally wear, especially not standing beside my bed in the middle of the night. He was just there. He was not smiling in a creepy way. He was not angry. He was not reaching for me or trying to scare me. He did not feel malevolent at all. He felt curious. That is the only way I can describe it. He seemed like a little child looking at someone new, almost as if he was wondering who I was or why I was in the room. His presence was surprising, of course, because there should not have been a child standing beside me. But the feeling he gave off was completely different from the dark man-shaped figure in the first house. The dark presence had felt heavy and ominous. It felt like something that did not want good things for me. The little boy did not feel that way. He felt gentle, or at least harmless. Strange, yes, but not dangerous. I looked at him for a moment, trying to understand what I was seeing. Then I turned the light off and went back to sleep. I know that sounds like an odd reaction. A lot of people might think they would scream, jump out of bed, or run from the room. Maybe I would have done that if he had felt threatening. But he did not. There was no sense of danger coming from him. Maybe I was too tired to panic. Maybe because he seemed like a child, I did not feel the same fear. Maybe some part of me understood that he was only curious and not there to harm me. By morning, he was gone, and everything was normal again. Still, I never forgot him. His blonde curls, his small size, the sailor suit, the quiet curiosity of his presence, all of it stayed in my mind. It felt too specific to be just a random dream. It felt like I had seen a child from another time standing beside me in a house old enough to have known children dressed exactly like that. Both of these experiences happened in Saginaw, Michigan. The houses were not the same, but they were both very old, and both were within a couple of miles of the area known as Old Town. At the time, I did not know much about haunted stories connected to the city. I only knew what had happened to me. Years later, I found a series of documentaries about haunted locations in Saginaw by Steve Prozac Shippey. One of them was called A Haunting on Hamilton Street. When I learned about that, it made me think back to both houses. The Hamilton Street area was not far from where I had lived. Both of the houses were within a couple of miles of it. I am not saying that proves anything, but it made the experiences feel connected to the city in a way I had not thought about before. Maybe that part of Saginaw has more history than people realize. Maybe old grief, old families, old deaths, and old memories linger there in ways that are hard to explain. The two encounters could not have felt more different. In the first house, I woke up to something dark and man-shaped standing in the corner, staring at me. It felt ominous enough that I had to speak out loud, say that only benevolent spirits were welcome, and pray for protection. It did not return after that, but when my son told me it had happened to him too, I knew I had not been the only one affected by it. In the second house, I woke up with the light on and saw a little blond boy with curls standing next to me, wearing a sailor suit from the 1800s. He did not feel evil. He seemed curious, almost innocent. I was startled, but not terrified in the same way. I simply turned off the light and went back to sleep. I still do not know what either of them were. Maybe the dark presence was some kind of shadow formed by sleep and fear. Maybe the little boy was part of a dream that followed me into waking for a few seconds. Maybe old houses make the mind create figures because they already feel full of history. Those are the practical explanations, and I understand why people would choose them. But I also know what I felt. I know the dark presence in the corner felt wrong. I know my son said it had happened to him too. I know the little boy seemed real enough for me to remember his curls, his age, and his old-fashioned sailor suit years later. And I know that both houses were very old, both were in Saginaw, and both were not far from an area that later became known to me through stories and documentaries about hauntings. Maybe it was all coincidence. Maybe old houses simply make strange things easier to imagine. Or maybe certain places hold on to more than we think. All I know is that in one house, something dark watched me from the corner of my room. In the other, a little boy from another time stood quietly beside my bed. And even after all these years, I have never been able to forget either one. I was about 12 or 13 when this happened, and even now, years later, I still get chills when I think about it. It was one of those experiences that sounds simple when you say it quickly, but when you actually live through it, it changes the way you feel inside a house. It was not some dramatic movie scene with a figure standing at the end of a hallway or a voice whispering my name. It was ordinary at first. That was what made it so unsettling. It started with normal house sounds, the kind of sounds you would hear if someone came home late and started moving around in the kitchen. But by the end of it, I was standing at the bottom of the stairs, looking at every cabinet and drawer in the kitchen hanging open, knowing nobody was home. I was home alone that night. My mom was out with her boyfriend, and my sister was off partying with her friends. I do not remember exactly why I had been left alone, but I remember the feeling of it clearly. At that age, you are old enough that people think you can handle being by yourself for a while, but still young enough that the quiet of a house at night can really get to you. During the day, being home alone might have felt exciting. I could watch what I wanted, eat what I wanted, move around without anyone bothering me. But at night, especially in an old house, it was different. Old houses are creepy. I do not care how reasonable a person tries to be, they just are. They make noises newer houses do not make. The floors creak when no one is walking. Pipes knock inside the walls. Doors settle in their frames. The wood seems to shift and sigh as the temperature changes. You can tell yourself all of that is normal, and maybe it is, but when you are 12 or 13 and alone in the dark, every sound feels like it has a purpose. A creak is not just a creak. It is someone stepping carefully in the hallway. A tap is not just the house settling. It is something touching the wall. I was already scared before anything even happened. That is why I was trying to fight sleep. I wanted to stay awake until someone came home. I did not want to fall asleep alone in that house. I knew that once my mom or my sister got back, I would be able to relax. There is something comforting about knowing another living person is in the house with you. Even if they are downstairs and you are upstairs, even if they are not talking to you, just knowing they are there changes everything. The house stops feeling so empty. The dark corners stop feeling as dangerous. You can finally let your guard down. But until then, I was upstairs, trying not to fall asleep. I remember feeling exhausted. It was late, and I was lying there, probably with the lights off or dimmed, listening to the quiet around me. I was at that stage where your eyes keep closing, even though you do not want them to. Your thoughts start to drift. You jerk yourself awake every few minutes because you remember you are alone and scared. I was fighting it as hard as I could, but sleep was starting to win. Then, I heard someone downstairs. At first, I felt relieved. That was my first reaction, and that is one of the strangest parts of the memory now. The sound did not scare me in the beginning. It made me grateful. I heard footsteps downstairs, and my whole body relaxed a little because I thought, finally, someone is home. I did not care if it was my mom or my sister. I did not care if they were being loud. I was just happy I was not alone anymore. I remember thinking that now I could actually sleep. The footsteps moved around downstairs. They sounded normal enough at first, like a person walking through the lower floor of the house. Then I started hearing sounds from the kitchen. Cabinets opening, cabinets closing, drawers sliding out, drawers being pushed back in. It sounded exactly like someone rummaging around, looking for something to eat or trying to find a dish, a snack, or whatever they wanted after coming home late. I assumed it was my sister. That made the most sense to me. My mom was out with her boyfriend, and my sister was the one who would be out with friends and come home making noise. I pictured her in the kitchen, probably hungry, probably not caring how loud she was being. The more I listened, the more annoyed I started to get. I had been so relieved that someone was home, but now the noise was keeping me awake. She was opening and closing things so loudly that it started to frustrate me. I was tired, scared, and finally ready to sleep, and there she was banging around the kitchen like she had forgotten anyone else existed. The sounds kept going. Footsteps, cabinets, drawers. It was not one quick noise that I could explain as the house settling. It went on long enough for me to form an entire story in my head. My sister was home. She was in the kitchen. She was making something to eat. She was being loud. I was getting irritated. That was the normal explanation, and I believed it completely. Finally, I got too frustrated to stay in bed. I decided to go downstairs and tell her to be quiet so I could sleep. I got up and left my room, probably still half tired and annoyed. The fear I had been feeling earlier was mostly gone by then because, in my mind, someone was home. I walked toward the stairs, expecting to see lights on downstairs, maybe hear my sister moving around, maybe smell food or hear her talking to herself. I was ready to complain, not investigate anything scary. But as I started going down the stairs, something felt off. I do not know if the noises stopped right before I came down or if I only noticed the silence once I was already moving. But I remember the house feeling suddenly quiet in a way that did not match what I had just heard. A few seconds earlier, someone had been moving around the kitchen loudly. Now there was nothing. No footsteps. No cabinet sounds. No drawers. No sister calling out. No microwave beeping. No fridge door closing. Just silence. I reached the bottom of the stairs. No one was there. The kitchen was empty. For a second, my brain did not accept it. I had heard someone. I had heard them clearly. They had been walking around downstairs and opening and closing things in the kitchen. I had been so sure it was my sister that I came down ready to yell at her for being loud. But there was nobody standing there. Nobody at the counter. Nobody by the fridge. Nobody in the living room. Nobody moving through the house. Then I saw the cabinets. All the kitchen cabinets were swung open. The drawers were pulled out. That is when the fear really hit me. It was not just that I heard noises and found no one. That would have been scary enough. But the kitchen looked exactly like someone had been there doing what I heard. The cabinet doors were open. The drawers were pulled out. It was physical proof that something had happened, but no person was there to explain it. I stood there, staring at the kitchen, feeling like my mind was trying to split in two. One part of me wanted to believe my sister had been there and somehow left silently. The other part knew that did not make sense. The cabinets had not been like that before. They were open now because something had opened them. I called my sister. I do not remember if I called her first because I was still hoping there was a normal answer, or because I needed someone to hear me panic, but I called her. I asked where she was. She was not home. She was not even close to home. She had not come back, made noise in the kitchen, and left again. She was still out with her friends. Then I called my mom. Same thing. She was nowhere close to home either. That was the moment the situation became impossible for me. My mom was out. My sister was out. Neither of them had come home. I had been alone the whole time, but I had heard someone downstairs. I had heard footsteps. I had heard cabinets and drawers opening and closing. I had walked down expecting to see a person, and instead I found an empty kitchen with everything hanging open. I was terrified. At that age, your mind goes through every possibility very quickly. Was someone hiding in the house? Had a stranger broken in? Was my sister lying? Was my mom trying not to scare me? Had I imagined the sounds? But the cabinets were open. The drawers were pulled out. I could not explain that away as easily. If a real person had done it, where were they? If it was an intruder, why would they vanish without taking anything or making another sound? How could they move through the house so quickly and quietly after making all that noise? I remember feeling exposed at the bottom of the stairs. Upstairs had seemed scary before, but now downstairs felt worse. The kitchen was right there, open and silent. Every dark doorway felt like it could be hiding someone. The house suddenly felt too big, full of places where something could stand just out of sight. I wanted to run back upstairs, but I also did not want to turn my back on the kitchen. I wanted to leave the house, but I was young, alone, and scared. I do not even remember exactly what I did right after that, only that the fear stayed with me. The worst part was how ordinary the noises had been. If I had heard a whisper or a strange growl or something obviously supernatural, maybe I would have been scared right away. But this sounded like family coming home. It sounded like someone I knew. It sounded safe. That is what makes it so creepy to me now. Whatever was in that kitchen, or whatever caused that to happen, used normal household sounds. It made me feel relieved first. It made me think I was no longer alone. Then it left me standing there with every cabinet open and nobody in the house. I have tried to think of explanations over the years. Maybe I was half asleep and dreamed the noises. But then why were the cabinets and drawers open? Maybe my sister really did come home and leave again fast, but she said she was nowhere near the house, and there was no reason for her to lie about something like that. Maybe my mom came home and left, but she also was not close to home. Maybe I had opened the cabinets earlier and forgotten, but that does not fit either. I would have noticed an entire kitchen full of open cabinets and pulled out drawers, especially when I was already nervous about being alone. Maybe it was an intruder. That explanation is almost worse in some ways, but it still does not really work. If someone had broken into the house and was rummaging through the kitchen, I should have heard a door. I should have seen signs of entry. They would have had to leave very quickly and silently when I came downstairs without me seeing them, and without any noise after making plenty of noise before. It is possible, I guess, but it never felt right. The sounds I heard did not feel like someone sneaking through the house. They sounded like someone who belonged there, casually moving around the kitchen. That thought bothers me. Because if it was not my mom, not my sister, and not some stranger, then who was acting so comfortable in our kitchen? I still do not know. All I know is that I was a scared kid trying to stay awake because I did not want to sleep alone in an old house. I heard someone downstairs and felt relieved because I thought someone had finally come home. I listened to them walking around and opening and closing cabinets and drawers in the kitchen. I got annoyed because they were being so loud. I went downstairs to tell my sister to quiet down, and when I got there, no one was there. The kitchen cabinets were open. The drawers were pulled out. My sister was not home. My mom was not home. I was still alone. That memory has stayed with me for years because it felt like the house tricked me. It took the one thing I wanted most that night, the sound of someone coming home, and turned it into something terrifying. I had been trying so hard not to fall asleep because I was afraid of being alone, and for a few minutes I thought I was safe. Then I found out I had never been safe at all. Even now, I can picture the kitchen exactly how it looked when I reached the bottom of the stairs. The open cabinet doors, the drawers jutting out, the silence after all that noise, the horrible realization settling in as I held the phone and heard my sister and my mom both tell me they were nowhere near home. I have had a few strange things happen in my life, but one of the earliest ones is still one of the hardest for me to explain. I was about 6 years old at the time, and my baby brother was around 4. We were upstairs in my room, just playing like little kids do, not thinking about anything scary or unusual. It was the middle of an ordinary day in an ordinary town, in an ordinary house with a small backyard. There was no reason for anything impossible to happen there. Then the house started to shake. It was not a tiny vibration or a normal old house creak. It felt like something big was close to the house, something heavy and loud enough to make the air and walls tremble. My brother and I both noticed it at the same time. We stopped playing and looked toward the window because the sound and movement seemed to be coming from outside. When we looked out, there was a helicopter, not high in the sky, not far away above the neighborhood. It was right there outside our window, close enough that we could see the pilot clearly. He was a man with a big bushy mustache and aviator sunglasses, and he looked directly at us. Then he waved. That is the part I remember so clearly. He did not just glance at us. He waved, like he knew 2 little kids were standing there watching him. And we saw him. Both of us saw him. We were young, but not so young that we would mistake something else for a helicopter hovering outside our window. The house was shaking. The helicopter was there. The man was there. The mustache, the sunglasses, the wave, all of it felt completely real. The problem is that it should have been physically impossible. We lived in the middle of a town. We did not live on a farm with fields around us or somewhere with enough open land for a helicopter to hover safely right by the house. Our backyard was small. The houses were close enough, and the space was tight enough that there was no way a helicopter could have been sitting or hovering there the way we saw it. It should not have fit. It should not have been able to get that close without smashing into something, causing damage, or drawing the attention of the entire neighborhood. But it was there. At least, we saw it there. Later, when we told our mom, the story became even stranger. She did not just dismiss it the way some adults might. She told us she had experienced something similar when she was our age, with her own brother. That gave me chills later when I was old enough to understand how odd that was. It was not just one strange childhood memory belonging to me and my brother. My mom had a matching memory from when she was little, too. And there was one more piece that made it feel connected to something deeper in our family. Her dad, my grandfather, had been a medic in Vietnam before she was born. That detail has always stayed with me. The helicopter we saw had a Vietnam feeling to it, at least in the way I remember it now. The man with the bushy mustache and aviator sunglasses looked like someone from that era, like a face from an old war photo or a movie about soldiers and helicopters. I do not know if that means anything. Maybe my mind tied the pieces together later. Maybe the story feels connected because of what I learned about my grandfather. But it is hard not to wonder why my mother and her brother saw something like that as children, and then years later, my brother and I saw something similar too. It felt like a memory that did not belong to us had somehow repeated itself. Maybe it was connected to my grandfather. Maybe it was connected to Vietnam. Maybe it was some kind of echo. I do not know. I only know that when I was 6, my 4-year-old brother and I looked out an upstairs window and saw a helicopter outside our house, where no helicopter could possibly be, with a man in aviator sunglasses and a big mustache waving at us. And that is only one of the things. Then there are the Fae folk. I know that sounds strange, and I know people have different beliefs about things like that. Some people hear Fae and think of fairy tales, little wings, harmless magic, and cute stories for children. That is not exactly what I mean. The things around us never felt like some cartoon version of fairies. They felt older than that, stranger than that, and more difficult to understand. Not always evil, but not something I would call fully safe either. They have their own way of being, and for some reason, they have always loved my daughter. When she was little, before we had a serious talk with them, they liked to bother her at bedtime. At first, it seemed playful, but it was still unsettling because you could tell something was happening. She would be lying in bed, ready for sleep, and suddenly she would start giggling like someone was tickling her. Not a fake laugh, not a child trying to get attention, but that uncontrollable little kid laugh that comes out when someone is really tickling you. Then you would see the blankets shift. That was the part that made it impossible to ignore. The blankets would move around her, especially near her tummy, like invisible hands were poking and tickling her. She would giggle and squirm the way a child does when someone is playing with them. But there was no one there, no adult leaning over her, no sibling hiding nearby, no pet under the blanket. Just my daughter laughing in bed while the covers moved as if someone unseen was trying to make her laugh. At first, it was easy to tell ourselves it was harmless. She was laughing, not screaming. She did not seem hurt. The energy felt playful. But bedtime is not when you want invisible things playing with your child. Even if they seem friendly, there is a line. Children need to sleep. They need to feel safe. And parents need to know that the things around their children are not crossing boundaries. They also used to sit outside her door. I know that sounds impossible, but that is what it felt like. There would be this sense of something waiting just outside, trying to get in. Our dog knew it too. He would lie with us and suddenly start growling toward her door or toward the hall, not barking at a normal sound outside, not reacting to the wind, but growling low and serious like something he did not trust was nearby. Our cat would stare. Anyone who has had cats knows that stare. The fixed, unblinking focus on a spot where you cannot see anything, but the animal clearly seems to be watching something. The dog would growl, the cat would stare, and my daughter would talk about them like they were simply part of life. Eventually, we had to have a talk with them. I do not know how else to put it. We made it clear that bedtime was not for bothering her. No more tickling her when she was trying to sleep. No more trying to get into her room at night. No more making the animals tense and keeping the house unsettled when everyone should be resting. It felt strange to speak out loud to things we could not see, but when something is interacting with your child, you do what you have to do. After that, it changed. They did not fully leave her alone, but they stopped bothering her the same way at night. Now they mostly bug her during the daytime. She still talks about them a lot. To her, they are not some vague fear or imaginary idea. They are part of her world. She speaks about the Fae folk like they are real beings with their own habits and personalities. Most of the time, that is who she says they are. But every now and then, she also talks about her great-grandma. Her great-grandma passed away when her dad was a teenager, long before my daughter could have known her in the normal way. That is another piece that makes everything feel layered. It is not only the Fae folk around her. Sometimes it seems like family is around too, watching over her, or visiting in whatever way spirits visit. I do not know exactly how to separate one from the other. I do not know if children can see more clearly, or if certain families just carry these experiences from one generation to the next. But my daughter talks about these things with a calmness that makes it feel less like imagination and more like she is describing something she has simply accepted. That is how a lot of these things have been in my life. They are strange, but after a while they become part of the background. Not normal exactly, but familiar. You learn that there are things happening around you that other people may never see. You learn which ones feel playful, which ones feel watchful, and which ones feel dangerous. And there have been others. There was the demon in the mirror. That one is harder to talk about casually, because mirrors already feel like strange objects when you think about them too long. They are supposed to show you the room you are standing in, but sometimes they feel like doors instead of reflections. Sometimes you look into one and feel like something is looking back from the other side. Whatever I experienced with that mirror did not feel playful. It did not feel like the Fae. It felt darker, heavier, and more direct, like something wanted to be noticed and should not have been invited in. There was also the man with the tall hat. People who have seen shadow figures or strange night visitors often talk about a hat man, and I understand why. There is something deeply unsettling about a tall figure in a hat, standing where no person should be. It feels old and deliberate. A normal shadow can be explained by furniture, clothes, or light, but a man-shaped figure with a tall hat has too much identity, too much presence. When you see something like that, even for a second, your body knows it is wrong before your mind can explain why. Then there was the time I blacked out for over 3 months. That one still feels unreal to even say. Losing time is one of the most terrifying things a person can experience, because time is the structure you build your life around. You can explain a strange sound. You can question a shadow. You can tell yourself a child imagined something. But when there is a gap in your own life, a long stretch you cannot properly hold in your mind, it leaves a different kind of fear. It makes you question not just what is around you, but yourself. Where was I in those missing places? What happened that I cannot remember? Why did my life continue while my memory went dark? I do not have easy answers for that either. There were the elementals, too. Those never felt like ghosts in the human sense. They felt more like forces, like presences tied to the natural world rather than to a person who had once lived. There is a difference in the energy. Human spirits, if that is what they are, tend to feel personal. They carry moods, memories, and intentions that seem connected to a life. Elementals feel wider and older, less interested in people as individuals, more like something that belongs to land, weather, water, trees, or the hidden parts of the world most of us walk past without noticing. And then there was the ghost in the woods. The woods have always been a place where the line between normal and strange feels thin. During the day, trees can be peaceful. At night, or even in the wrong kind of quiet afternoon, they can feel alive in a way that is not comforting. Sounds carry strangely. Shapes move where nothing should move. You can feel watched, even when you know you are alone. A ghost in the woods does not feel the same as a ghost in a house. A house spirit feels contained by walls. A wood spirit feels like it can follow you from tree to tree, always staying just far enough away that you cannot prove it is there. So when I say I have had a few experiences, I really mean it. Some of them go back to childhood, like the impossible helicopter outside the window and the man with the mustache and aviator sunglasses waving at me and my brother. Some involve my daughter, who seems to attract the fae folk in a way that still makes me uneasy. Some feel tied to family, like the great-grandma she talks about, even though she was gone before my daughter could ever know her. Some feel darker, like the demon in the mirror or the man with the tall hat. Some are too strange to fit into a simple ghost story, like the blacked-out months or the elementals. I do not pretend to understand all of it. I do not even know if all these things come from the same place. Maybe some are spirits. Maybe some are family echoes. Maybe some are fae. Maybe some are something older that people used to understand better than we do now. Maybe some are memories, dreams, stress, or the mind trying to explain things it cannot handle. I know the practical explanations exist, and I have tried to use them. But practical explanations do not cover everything. They do not explain why two little kids saw a helicopter outside a window where no helicopter could physically be. They do not explain why our mother had seen something similar when she was young. They do not explain why my daughter's blankets moved while she laughed like invisible hands were tickling her. They do not explain why the dog growled at her door and the cat stared like something was waiting there. They do not explain why, after we spoke out loud and set boundaries, the nighttime activity changed. Maybe some families are just close to that kind of thing. Maybe certain people are more open to it. Maybe children see it most clearly because no one has taught them not to. Maybe these things are around everyone, but most people never notice unless something decides to make itself known. I do not know. All I know is that I have seen enough, heard enough, and lived through enough to believe the world is much stranger than it looks on the surface. There are things that stand at the edge of normal life. Sometimes they wave from impossible helicopters. Sometimes they play with children at bedtime. Sometimes they wait in mirrors. Sometimes they stand in the woods. Sometimes they hide behind names like ghosts, fae, demons, or elementals. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, Just real stories about real people who survived things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can.